introduction. Welcome, everyone. Today, I would like to talk about moving from intent to action, proactively creating inclusive workplaces. So, in this world, we are all learning about how to have a equal, uh, inclusive, diverse group in our workplaces. And I'm hoping that I cover all the content related to that in this presentation. So it helps us understanding the process better and look into some of the options available for us to look. So before I start, I want to start with acknowledging that I respectfully acknowledge the Silks Okanagan Nation and their peoples in whose traditional ancestral unceded territory EBC Okanagan is situated and where I work and stay in with our family. So in today's lecture, I just try to cover some of the component. So before I start that, I will start with by saying that we are all learning and EDII that we call it at EBC system. So equity, diversity, inclusivity, and indigeneity is a journey, not a destination. You make the path by working it on it. So we are going through a different journey. Each of us are experiencing the journey differently. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Key steps along the journey. So we start by knowing the process. Understand what is EDII concepts such as identity, power, privilege, intersectionality, bias, and systemic oppression. So these are a lot of terms that we need to understand properly. And I also will share a link with our website that describes all those terms very well. Then develop your capacity to reflect, sit in discomfort, and emphasize with marginalized group to become a proactive ally. So the proactive ally is an important term here. Most of the time, we reflect on issues, but I want to focus on the proactive term because that's the important and key thing for our learning process. Then apply this understanding to help create inclusive spaces in your context. For example, classroom, lab, community, profession. So depending on your environment, you can apply those based on your spheres of influence, where you can influence the surrounding. So understand the process, develop the clear understanding, and then apply. So this is how should we start to learn about our journey. So framing the journey, understanding your spheres of influence. So we start with the personal level. At the personal level, we have a lot of learning to do. Learning about your positionality. So that's a key point that I'm going to describe further in my next slide. At the personal level, then it goes to the interpersonal level. So practice proactive allyship because when we have the personal identity, our positionality, then we act on to develop that practice proactive allyship. So that involves others. Then it goes to the organizational stage where identifying the systems that you can influence based on your personal, interpersonal, and the organizational level. So for the group guidelines, we start from listen with an open mind. This is a key thing. Listening is a big skill when we are trying to develop the EDI, understanding processes and proactiveness in the process. So listen with an open mind, value each other's thoughts and experiences. Another important factor, participate and share as you feel comfortable. It's not necessary that you have to participate on every issues that come across, but participate when you feel comfort and in the situation where you can contribute. request for confidentiality, and not repeating others' personal stories. This is important. You might be in a position where you learn from someone else who are experiencing and sharing their personal experience. And that story is a learning point for us. We learn from that, we gain knowledge. So our experience is important here, not the story. And then next time when we are sharing, we share the experience, not identifying the person who shared their personal stories. So understanding keeping the confidentiality matter in hand, and then understanding the process, how we take the knowledge, our experience with the knowledge, and then use that knowledge for future conversation, not the not breaking the confidentiality of the person. We might be mindful of airtime and make space for others. In every meetings or discussions, everyone should have opportunity to express their concerns, or just even discussion their point of view. So making sure, if you're leading some meetings, chairing, co-chairing, or even an important part of those meetings, allowing others to talk, that air space is important. Have compassion for each other as learners. Respectful environment is the key. Learning from others, sharing with sharing others' experience, and then allowing airspace. With all those practices, we can practice that respectful environment. So I'm just summarizing under understand. EDII concepts such as identity, power, privilege, intersectionality, bias, and systematic oppression. Those will be just sub covering under this category, and develop a positionality statement. And I also have shared the link where we have identified all those terms, clarified how to define those terms. So first one is the identity, the factors that will identify who this Sumi Siddiqua is. All those factors like age, gender, religion, sexual orientation, um, race, socioeconomic status, and that identifies my multiple identities based on all those components that I just mentioned. So we all have that positionality clear to our mind. It's not just I'm a female engineer, or I'm also a mother, I know middle-aged career, and then coming from a different social background, I'm an immigrant in this country. So all those different factors are helping me to identify my positionality. The second one is waterline visibility, which is very important, because which is uh, above the waterline visibility that I call, and based on the knowledge I have learned from these diversity resources. So which we can see from outside, it's very easy to identify those identity, but which we cannot see from outside, then it is difficult for us. So there are some questions that we can look into. So cultural self-awareness pertains to the level of understanding each of us has about how we are influenced by the various cultural groups we belong to. Some of the questions may be, how does my gender influence who I am? How does my or my family's current socioeconomic status affect how I spend vacations? What are some values I have learned based on the region of country where I grew up or live currently? How do my religious, spiritual, and moral benefits influence what I interpret as good and bad behavior? How does my ethnic or racial group influence my understanding of how family members should support each other? So these are cultural self-awareness. Then the cultural below the tip of iceberg. These are some of the questions. What does being a part of a specific cultural group mean to each of us? How are we influenced and informed by our cultural groups? How do we check our cultural lenses that overly and covertly influence our norms, behaviors, assumptions, and expectations? This is where we see the challenges. This is where we see our positionality changes, understanding changes according to EDI. Next term that I want to talk about the intersectionality. So as you can see, this lenses, which is a lenses and a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. We tend to talk about race inequality as separate form of inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these, and the experience is not just some of its parts. So this is an important image to remember. There are a lot of factors that influence the experience, and it's not individual item defines different experience, but some people have all of them and how they experience it. Understanding that is a complex problem. According to me, it's just not simple to understand all of those. The next one is the power and privilege. How do you know who is powerful and who doesn't have the power? So if you look into this wheel of power and privilege, you see that the center, the all those components at the center where we see the power, and away from the center where people are under the marginalized group. So if you just describe that point a little bit clearly on the power of wheels. So all those individual items or the elements what we have here start with the citizenship, skin color, formal education, ability, sexuality, neurodiversity. Then we look into the health, mental health, body size, housing, wealth, language, gender. So all those different categories. And if you see at the center, at the power, you see in the skin color, it's white. Formal education is post-secondary. So that means, university graduate. Then ability is able to do things, everything. Heterosexuality, then you see the neurotypical, robust, slim, owns property, rich, and can speak the language, English. It's at the center in the power of the wheel. You see gender-wise is man and a citizen. And then the marginalized group, you see that under citizenship is undocumented, skin color dark, and the educational side, elementary education ability is significantly disabled. Sexuality, different categories like lesbian and others. Neurodiversity, then significant neuro divergence. Mental health, vulnerable, body size, large, housing, homeless, wealth, poor, language, non-English speaking, gender, transgender, non-binary, citizenship. We started with undocumented. So what is at the center, more powerful, what is outside in the marginalized group? That's another important image to think about and identify the different categories when we are dealing with the power and privilege. So this is an important code to understand. Privilege isn't the presence of perks and benefits, it's the absence of obstacles and barriers. That's a lot harder to notice. If you have a hard time recognize your privileges, focus on what you don't have to go through. Let that fuel your empathy and action. So that is a key thing to understand. Sometimes we don't understand what is our power and what is our privilege. Next, it comes the implicit bias, and there is test in Harvard in implicit bias then that you can look into just to check identify the implicit bias you might have. When implicit associations lead to unequal treatment, often linked to stereotypes. can result to reflexive thinking, can be unintentional, but is still harmful. So this is a good link to look into and identify those biases that we have. That brings back to the positionality is the social and political context that creates your identity in terms of race, gender, sexuality, ability, status, all those powerfuls we looked into, and describes your identity, influences, and potential biases, your understanding of and outlook on the world. Because where you come from, what is the cultural background, what is the educational background, all those things drives people into favor implicitly or explicitly to some group of people, and that's the understanding is important. Actually, if you don't understand, if it is you are biasing because you came from Harvard, you're supporting people from that institute, Stanford, that institute. So those are the factors. We have to understand the process. Then it helps us to um, clearly see where those discriminations are happening, where we are not inclusive, where we are not making our decision, when it suffers the EDI components altogether. From difference to oppression, that's the staircase that talks about from difference to oppression. So starting from differences between individuals or groups, then it goes to stereotypes, bias, prejudice, discrimination, and then oppression. So that's how the staircase works. Next, the lenses of systematic oppression. So when it is an individual, it can be institutional, and then it can be interpersonal. So at the individual level, we have a person's beliefs and actions that serve to perpetuate oppressions, conscious and unconscious, externalized and internalized. And the institution level, which is a systematic one, policies and practices at the organization or a sector level that perpetuate oppression, structural, how these effects interact and accumulate across institutes and across history. Then we have individual and institutional, that it comes the interpersonal, the interactions between the people and both within and across differences. So that's the interpersonal. So we try to understand the EDI, and now we're going to develop your capacity to reflect, sit in discomfort, and emphasize with marginalized groups to become a proactive ally. As I said, the proactive ally, which we are aiming for. Some important things to consider when we are trying to develop our skills. Few things we need to consider: that acting with care, harm, and intent. Sometimes we want to help, but that can harm people. Being a proactive ally, and what are the process for that? Learning from discomfort. Acting with care. Anti-oppression work requires that we come up against the ways in which we experience and perpetuate harm in our community. Invite in self-compassion for ourselves and others. Due to the challenging nature of this work, it requires that we show up with care for ourselves and others. Developing a culture of care. We can show up with care for ourselves and others through humility, reflexivity, lifelong learning, accountability. So sometimes, um, in a place where your goal is to help someone, but the kind of references that you are using, that can be disrespectful for others in the same environment. So understanding that process, and if you have done some of those actions in the past and you have learned from that, and sharing those stories with a setting in a same context can be helpful. The accountability is important, just when you acknowledging the learning process, the failure in the past, and then from there how you have learned to come across that. But I feel personally, I feel as long as we are trying to be, show our humility, we acknowledge, support, creating a space for others, respectful, and we can just take our, understanding about EDI, you know, further ahead. Harm and intent, I just wanted to, a little bit more highlight on this aspect, because I just mentioned, although intent does matter, our actions are what matter most. Because when we have something in, we think about that in our mind, our intent, but when we are acting, our intent is not reflective about our, based on our actions, then that can create confusion, that can create harm. So intent is important, but actions are what matter most. When even we are well-meaning, we can still cause harm. This is a space where we can call each other in and identify how we can bring more awareness to our actions. Learning from discomfort. Discomfort in learning can be a result of defensive anger, fear of change, fear of losing our personal or cultural identity. So we understand that this is a very common discomfort that we probably all feel. Learning from discomfort. The key to moving forward is what we do with our discomfort. We can use it as a door out, blame the messenger and disregard the message, or we can use it as a door in by asking, why does this unsettle me? How can my uneasiness or unease help reveal the unexamined assumptions I have been making? So if we don't experience, if we don't discuss, we don't know what is the reason I'm feeling discomfort. What is my personal challenge? If we don't share, discuss, the knowledge is not improving. So we don't know the main reason. So it's better to just allow the process, talk about that. Maybe you can pick up some of your allies to discuss the matter and understand the problem carefully, and then realize, okay, why I was feeling discomfort and how can I change my approach towards the issue. So learning from that discomfort, apology framework from Mia Minas, self-reflection, apologizing, repair, behavior change. So as I just said, that self-reflection, then learn how to, apologize for the wrong behavior. Or I would say that without having proper knowledge about the subject, we can come across, reacting a way which is not appropriate. Then learn how to apologize, repair. If we don't learn from our past mistake, then there is no point. So we have to repair our behavior, and then behavior change. That means our mental model should change afterwards. Next, we go to apply. These understandings to help create inclusive spaces in our context. So for our case, it's like classroom, lab, community, but workplace, professional space, based on your spheres of influence. So interpersonal personal level, then it will go up to the organizational level. Take actions across your spheres of influence. So either interpersonal, then organizational, and then move forward. Practice allyship, which is one of the key things to make changes. Allyship is an action, not an identity. The practice of allyship involves humility, reflexibility, lifelong learning, and accountability. Allyship is a relational. Allyship can be reactive or proactive. So there are lots to think about how you can have a proactive allyship. So to be an ally to it, take on the struggle as your own, stand up even when you feel scared, transfer the benefits of your privilege to those who lack it, acknowledge that while you to feel pain and conversation is not about you. So these are some ways to think about. For example, proactive ways, just acknowledging the success of a marginalized member of your group. Proactively, just specifying, calling their names and then just celebrating their success. And reactive would be when some others are mentioning, then you are going and acknowledging that. So just look into that reactive and proactive allyship in a little bit more details. So reacting to bias when you see it, for example, confronting subtle and explicitly biased remarks. And proactive way would be just a proactive efforts to increase inclusion, inviting marginalized coworkers onto key projects. That's one way to look into. Others, like reactive allyship, reacting to bias when we see it, addressing inappropriate jokes, countering condescending comments, questions lack of diverse job candidates on shortlist. If you are working in a hiring team, that's when you see and comment on that. But in a proactive way, if you're looking into proactive allyship, then proactive efforts to increase inclusion, amplifying women's contribution, sponsoring a minority person in your field, seeking out women for her expertise, including all teammates in social functions. So these are some of the examples of looking into reactive allyship and the proactive allyship. So take action across your spheres of influence. So if you are in the organizational setting, identify your system and structure that you can influence. Many of us can influence many ways that we probably don't realize. But if you are thinking to make changes at your workplace, then this is a time to think about your system and structures. System change, if you're looking into applied science and EBC, our EDI Dean Cheryl Staff French is looking into the faculty focused system. How do we embed EDI into applied science system structure and culture? So there are a lot of components here that I wanted to highlight. So the elements are starting from the leadership, which is at the center, starting from recruitment, retention, and promotion. We're looking into the system change here, starting from the culture, support and mentorship, teaching, research, professional development, data metrics, accountability. So all those factors are part of those system change where we can change the culture. Then looking into the next one here, system and culture change, priority areas. So what are our priority areas for system and culture change? How do we embed the EDI into applied science system, structures, and cultures across all departments and schools have to work in multiple levels. And the important items are like leadership, data metrics, engagement, education, and training. So these are the different components. But that requires lot of training process, identifying the issues, um, and after identifying those issues, how to encourage people to participate in learning process, and how we gather those data so that we have all the recorded data. From there, what can be changed in the system level and the cultural level of the faculty, so that we don't go back to the previous state, we move forward. Let's talk through this through your role and the unit. So next step would be just looking into what are your sphere of influence? Where are you at the organizational level? In the, what is how much you can influence, what are the components you can control. And for example, if you are working in the hiring team, can you decide how you're going to go with your hiring process for the organization? Can you select the hiring committee based on the EDI matrix? Do you have enough people from each groups that work in your organization? Can you include 50%, women in the hiring committee? Can you include other marginalized groups into the hiring committee? So all those factors are important, but can you influence your sphere of influence your organizational sphere based on that? So identify your systems and structures that you can influence, and you can go from there. What are the barriers to advancing EDII in your role? Barriers at the individual level, barriers at the unit level. So just maybe you can provide some of the barriers on the chat box, talking about what do you see the barriers in the individual level to make contribution to the EDII lens, um, and then if it is not in the personal level, what is at the unit level that you see that those can be barriers for you to make the progress? Then what do you think you should be prioritized over the next year in your role? That means if you have right now your barriers, and identify those barriers and what you can do for the next year to make the plans. So this is where I am going to talk about my role in the institution, and then how we are looking into addressing them. So the sphere of influence that we have just talked about. I am in the organizational sphere where my role is the associate director of the graduate program. So that means I have people working under me that I can influence by the decision making and the process of the graduate hiring the graduate student in our School of Engineering, that a small component of the Faculty of Applied Science. So that includes how we are going to identify the graduate students in the program, and that will create the diversity in our hiring process of the in the graduate program. So what we are looking at now, we are adding EDI uh, rubrics in the process. So we are identifying our group of graduate students in the program, looking into the lack of participations from which group of people are not there in our program, identifying that, and then start to proactively looking for missing groups. One of them are indigenous group, and then there are a lot of activities that we have at the School of Engineering to encourage that group to come forward and join the graduate program. So it's a slow process, but we have identified that, and now we are working towards increasing that number in our school. The one step for that, you always need to have role models to encourage any specific group of people into the system. So first step for that was to we identified the group, then we initiate to hire indigenous faculties in our school. And currently we have 4 indigenous faculties in our school. So that that is the starting point to bring more indigenous students into the system. So as as in my role, we have looked into this way, not the hiring process, but the understanding the group of students missing from our graduate program. But then the part of the bigger scale in at applied science, our leadership looked into we need to hire more indigenous faculty members, and then they brought those into the system, and then that is helping us to increase our indigenous student population in the graduate program. So that's what I wanted to remind you again at the last point here, that we are all learning. EDII work is a journey and not a destination. You make the path by working on it. So our everyone is going through a different journey, and the thing is get comfortable being uncomfortable, because many times we feel uncomfortable facing some situations where sometimes we don't have the influence that we can make even changes. So we are outside that sphere of influence. So our voice is not important, and then we feel uncomfortable staying into that situation. But still, as I said, that allyship is important. Developing that allyship, helping each other in a process of this journey, and we all are learning from each other. So that's where I want to end up my presentation. And I wanted to get back to my two questions I asked. If someone would like to share their questions about, share their comments about what is the barriers you feel at the individual level, and what are the barriers you see in at the unit level or in your organization.